All right, so this is a video for and by the Keith Knight fandom. So Keith Knight, don't tread on anyone. If you're not familiar, you should definitely go and check out the channel. He's a really smart anarcho-capitalist, and he started this new video called Hearing the Other Side, which it seems like it's going to be a series where basically he just interviews people with different ideas. And the first one in the series with Professor Ben Burgis, and it was really interesting. If you saw the video on the professor's channel, you might be confused because the professor called it a debate, or at least he titled it debate with an exclamation mark, which I'm not sure if that means it was a debate or he's instructing the people in his comments to debate. Man, if that was a debate, Keith, you did a terrible job. I hope you do better next time, but honestly, all your responses just sounded like questions to me. You didn't really present too many ideas. Most of them were seemed more like queries than they were like premises and conclusions. So I think you did a pretty bad job representing anarcho-capitalism in this debate. I do wonder though what an interview is, though, if that was a debate. I guess an interview would be like if Keith wasn't there at all, which I'm pretty sure what the professor does at his job, if he's a professor lecturing, that would be similar. So I guess what the professor does in front of his students is interview, which must be pretty confusing. Like when you walk in first day of class, like, you know, labor theory of value 101, and the professor says, okay, the interview begins now. Man, I can just imagine the panic in the room. But anyways, so I'm not really a YouTuber. I've just got all my lights on. I wanted to film during the day, but unfortunately, the sun comes up at about 7:30 and goes back down at about 7:35 here, so that's not gonna work. Yeah, I've just got my iPhone here and a few notes. The first thing is that Keith brought up this idea that, you know, if you're going to arrange society in terms of like this hierarchy where you have workers at the bottom and then you have bosses on top, doesn't it make sense to then put the customer on top of that, because the customer is where you know, where the money is flowing down from. The professor seemed to think that was not appropriate because in his view, that isn't really the dynamic, and it isn't really realistic to think of competition the way capitalists think of competition, where the customers are shaping the marketplace by deciding where to spend their money. He points out that when you are making a purchase decision, you do it based on lots of different factors that to determine basically what I would describe as how you value it. His point was, you know, if you're in a rush going home and you're tired and you just want the most convenient option, you're not necessarily going to choose the place with the best bosses. You're going to choose the place that's easiest for you. He marked that as sort of a con. I would mark that down as a pro for capitalism, and I'm not sure how you can see that as a bad thing when people are actually aware of the costs of their activism. It's a strange thing to think that people should be insulated from the costs of their decisions, because I mean that is the point of the government. If that's what you want to do, then then the government is the way to do that, because that is the point of having people you know, who are subject to different rules than everyone else, is they aren't subject to the effects of their decisions. And customers, when they send their money to the government to spend it for them, really you know, it's proven just from our own day-to-day experience, we lose sight of what the costs are until it's too late. I think COVID is a very good example of that, where people can ask the government to act, and the sort of unintended economic consequences and the unintended consequences for people who it turns out were vulnerable, but you hadn't really considered the specific type of vulnerability. It wasn't the biological kind, but the economic kind. they lost out because people weren't really able to weigh the cost of their decisions in real time like they are when they just spend their money themselves. It's interesting because if you think about it, you don't you don't ever escape the paradigm of choosing where you're going to get things from, and choosing your vendor and considering who your vendor isn't something that the government can protect you from, but the government is something that exists on top of that. It's something that we add on top of the market, and the additional mechanism of the government is its own cost to you day to day. You know, if you think about how much you think about politics, and if you think about how much energy and time society as a whole spends on politics, the cost of that alone really should make you consider letting people make the decisions for themselves where their money is spent. Hayek had a quote. I think I have it here. This is not a dispute about whether planning is to be done or not. It is a dispute as to whether planning is to be done centrally by one authority for the whole economic system, or is to be divided among many individuals. And that's the thing, right? I mean, I've noticed that that it comes up again and again anytime there's these discussions with statists, is they like to frame the market as something other than just you and I making the decisions for ourselves. Like they take the metaphor of the market or the invisible hand as a way to suggest that there's like a force, a discrete force that's acting, that's something other than us making our own decisions. And that's how you can characterize the economy the way the professor did when he said things like, you know, we can either leave it up to the market to decide how things work out, or we can actually influence it and consider values like fairness. I think I remember him saying fairness more than once. So I get the feeling that fairness is one of his values. It's a word that came up more than once, like I said. And I've heard other people say this where you feel like it's irrelevant who you buy from because you don't really choose the system, the overarching system that you are a part of, and you can't choose alternatives based on you know, your purchasing decisions or what you choose to buy or not buy, which is true, of course, and of course for radical capitalists that's been the struggle, is how do you achieve a society that doesn't legitimize violence without being hypocritical in your methods of achieving that society. So you know, yeah, it's true that you may feel that your decisions aren't consequential, but that's mostly because you're stuck in a statist system where your decisions are being made for you by other people. And again, that's a dichotomy. You can either make the economic decisions yourself, or somebody else will make them for you. There is no third option. You know, it's sort of like with property, very similar actually. Socialists like to talk about common property, common goods, which is of course just government property. Like public property is government property, and property in a state of nature is zero ownership, but you can have private ownership or public ownership, but you can't have some sort of third option where everyone owns something. That just doesn't make sense, and you can't find an example of it. It's not a logical possibility. So and I think there are other examples here of tricks of language being used to make arguments that are maybe they're arguments, but I think it's I think they're reliant on rhetoric more than logic. So we'll get to those. Ben's objection to people making decisions isn't really about how decisions are made. It's about who makes the decisions. And if we take this to be true, if we take what I say to be true here, then we have to wonder why have one group be preferential than the other. First of all, of course, you have to have some sort of principled way to divvy people up into these groups, which I don't think we really have. But let's say we could have a way to give one more influence than another in government, and let's say government isn't its own distinct class on its own, which I think it is. I think it always boils down to simply people in government making the decisions. Then why is the one group better than the other? I think that once you put aside stereotypes, it's very difficult to identify some sort of rationale for giving people political power, especially when your categorization isn't really based on anything. So like the poor and the rich, I don't know how you'd make a government that works for the poor. I'll link to a video below on basically the game theory of rulerdom and how it comes to be that you maintain power. Regardless of the economic system, it always comes down to who gets what in terms of how you maintain your dominance, or I guess I should say your legitimacy. So one thing that I think holds back socialists and libertarians from having more of these dialogues is that there are certain speed bumps, and one is this sort of hang up that statists have around this idea of equality, where the state creates equality, and without that sort of that option to force it, you're giving up sort of a very important tool. I mean, personally, I don't think equality exists. I guess that's for a different video, but it comes up here in the video near the end, I believe, when Keith is bringing up the idea that, for instance, Trump wouldn't have nearly as much power as he did if it wasn't for the presidency existing. And the professor agrees with that, but he points out that he would still have a lot of power, and he would still have more than someone like the mayor, for instance, right? Or like a local community leader, I guess, if it was a free market. So it's just an example of where there are values that, yeah, maybe the free market wouldn't address them, but it's not a value that in the libertarian worldview even makes sense to pursue. And I think it can be fairly convincingly argued that equality has never, will never, and could never exist. And there's really no reason to pursue it anyways. There's not really any good that can come out of pursuing it. But ultimately, yeah, you can eliminate political power, but you can't eliminate economic power, because economic incentives are just sort of a fact of life. So, you know, you can try to counter that in some way, but I think when you actually think on examples of where total equality has been tried, it never actually gets to the point where everyone is in effect accessing the same amount of resources. And I think that if you're really honest about it, you will come up short trying to find a system that really even proposes to give you the ability to give everyone the exact same equal access to resources, if that was really what you were hoping for. But even then, that would be a very arbitrary way of dividing scarce resources up, because of course people, I mean, even the communists acknowledge people need different amounts. So there are instantly problems just trying to define equality. But just a few more points. I'll be linking a video to another video on third-party buyer problem, which will give you sort of an economic reason why it's not a good idea for other people to be spending your money. It's always a good idea for you to spend your money whenever possible. And third parties suffer from the same sort of economic calculation problem that any government would. So definitely check that out as well when you're checking out Keith Knight's videos. And I also noticed the professor really relied on the rhetorical trick of using violence, force, and coercion. So whenever you're talking to a statist, you'll notice that they like to use these terms, violence, force, and coercion, because of the English vocabulary, you have these words that allow you to muddy the distinction between aggression and defense, and it's been a very important part of statist propaganda from who knows when. So look out for that. It's very convenient that you can avoid the use of defense and aggression entirely in these conversations, but I guess that's just how debates go. And also he blamed the lack of respiratory disease research on a lack of market pressure incentivizing research, which at first sounds like a good point, but then it makes you wonder what would be the solution to that, because I don't think the government really has a way to predict things like COVID. They certainly didn't have a way to predict SARS. They haven't shown the ability to predict whatever's coming next. I don't know what their current prediction is. I don't know if maybe the professor can link to it, but whatever they think is coming next, I would definitely wholeheartedly agree that we should be spending money on whatever's coming next. I would also like to know what the next lottery numbers are. But unless they have that ability, I really think that it's kind of crazy to say that we should be speculating on trying to anticipate what the next big concern will be. I think the fact that the market has been focused on addressing demand instead of trying to spend money on every possible thing, including a random respiratory virus that's pandemic, basically of dubious origin. I don't think that would have been a good idea. But I haven't taken the professor's class, if I do, I look forward to that interview. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully more videos on like a real camera, and like and subscribe and all that, and go check out Keith Knight, and yeah, peace.